I'll bet you didn't know that on the shores of Lake Superior, along Minnesota's North Shore, stands one of the best preserved mansions of America's Gilded Age in the country, Glensheen. But what was it really like to live on the shores of one of America's greatest lakes? To get ready in one of 7 private bathrooms, spanning 4 total floors, and eat in a dining room that could accommodate 20 beneath a chandelier so intricate, it took maids 2 days just to clean it. Today, we're exploring everything that makes this lavish and unique structure a stunning example of Jacobean Revival architecture and arts and crafts style. Its steep gables, brickwork, and carved details echo the English Jacobean manners of the early 1600s. But despite its grandeur, Glensheen is first and foremost a family home. It might surprise you to learn that the man who built this home found himself nearly orphaned and penniless at the age of 14. Chester Congdon was born in Rochester and grew up in upstate New York as the son of a Methodist minister. But when his father died unexpectedly while Chester was still in school, he became the sole breadwinner for himself and his mother. Taking on odd jobs and working farms in the summer, he cared for his mother and ultimately put himself through college at Syracuse University, earning his law degree. So it's fair to say Chester Congdon is the picture of the early American dream, a self-made man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps from humble beginnings to become a millionaire. Construction began on Glensheen in 1905 with the idea that it would be the family's summer home. By then, Chester was serving as district attorney in St. Paul, and Clara had 7 children. And though their home in St. Paul was ample, it could not compete with 20,000 square feet of space for a family of 9, as well as 22 acres sitting on the open shore of Lake Superior. What began as a summer retreat quickly became their permanent residence. Here, in his private study, Chester was able to continue working for the state while still being a part of family life. Let me bring you now down the hallway to the place where the family spent much of their time. Welcome to the living room. It's very subtle in here, but this is one of the more expensive rooms in the home. First, there is the Steinway piano here by the door, custom made for the Congdons from pure mahogany. And second, we have the Paris by day, Paris by night lamp that changes the streetscape of the carved shade depending on whether it's lit. But the real opulence is the fireplace. This is Numidian marble. It would have been quarried in Algeria or Tunisia and brought to Minnesota. It's typically found in temples and palaces, and of course, the homes of the ridiculously wealthy. Beside it, you'll see a waterfall Chester visited while touring Japan in 1914. That is not painted. It's embroidered in silk, and it was one of his treasured possessions. While we take a look in the library, I want to circle back around to Chester's wealth. You remember my telling you he was district attorney for Minnesota. Well, that's not where he made the bulk of his fortune, though it was a good place to start. One of the reasons St. Paul was so appealing was because the railroad was constantly expanding to new parts of America. Its arrival in Minnesota in the 1850s led to the discovery of massive iron ore deposits soon after. Chester began buying up mineral rights in the area, and it wasn't long before one of the richest iron ore deposits in the United States was discovered, the Mesabi Iron Range. As a lawyer, he helped U.S. Steel structure the deals that would mine the range and transport the ore across the country. The Mesabi Range would go on to supply the majority of the iron that built America's skyscrapers, railroads, and battleships. That is the wealth that built Glensheen. Before we leave, I want to read you one of the many notes Chester wrote in his books. He was very opinionated and did not hesitate to share it with others. This book is not worth reading. The author is so anxious to make language that the few facts stated are unreliable and the ideas nil. Then he is such an ass. Himself a tourist, he affects contempt for tourists until his book becomes a bore. It is a waste of time to attempt to enlarge one's knowledge and ideas from this book. Chester A. Congdon. With Chester's story in mind, let's head up the grand staircase and step into the rooms where the Congdon family actually lived their daily lives. The first bedroom you'll tour belonged to Marjorie, the Congdons' oldest daughter. She was 21 when the house was completed and lived here until she was married at age 30 to a mining engineer, Harry Dudley. One of the things that makes Glensheen unique is that almost everything you see here, upwards of 90%, is real. This isn't reproduction furniture. These are the things Marjorie Congdon would have touched, would have worn every day. There are a handful of these Gilded Age mansions still preserved in the U.S. today, and very few of them can boast that level of fidelity. Next, take a look at these interconnected windows. The one here in the bathroom lets in breezes off Lake Superior, while the ones in the closet pull that air current into the interior of the home. Think of it as Gilded Age air conditioning and an ingenious design. Finally, take note of the bathroom. What may look common to you, a flush toilet, a bathtub with cold and hot water taps, and a sink, all adjacent to a personal bedroom, were revolutionary for 1908. Most homes didn't even have bathrooms, much less hot and cold water coming into the house. Your average Minnesotan at the time would have had an outhouse in the yard, chamber pots under the beds, and a tin tub they brought into the kitchen once a week to be filled with water from a kettle on the stove. Water that would have been shared amongst family members. This is one of 7 bathrooms built into Glensheen. As we move down the hall toward the master bedroom, I want to point out the stained glass in the hallway here. You've noticed as we move around the house the stained glass in the grand staircase? Well, this is the first time we're seeing it in the interior. Glensheen's interior designer, William A. French, believed in beauty in everyday spaces. Putting something this expensive in a place where guests wouldn't ordinarily see it shows off more than the Congdons' money. It demonstrates their refinement. Welcome to the master bedroom. This is the largest bedroom in the home, sitting over top of the living room at roughly 2/3 its size. Its decor is inspired by the arts and crafts movement, something with a much different meaning today than it had then. Arts and crafts in the early 1900s was an aesthetic reaction to Victorian style. Where the Victorians were ostentatious, arts and crafts favored subtlety, natural materials, and nature. You'll note at the back of the room the large window that, if you could walk up to it, would show you Lake Superior. The room itself is embellished with pomegranates. Did you catch them? It's okay if you didn't. I didn't the first time either. They're here, and here, and above the fireplace. Pomegranates, filled with the seeds you see artistically rendered, were used to indicate fertility, and a master bedroom is exactly where you'd put them. Here on the nightstand is a figure of Clara herself working needlepoint, a piece commissioned and gifted to her by her 7 children in 1931. As an avid knitter, this has to be my favorite piece in the house. Clara's dressing room is just off the master bedroom and leads to yet another bathroom. The master bathroom reflects the focus of the time on the restorative powers of mineral bathing. Public bathhouses were common for healing and socializing. This is a sitz bath, used for soaking the lower extremities. And having one in your own personal bathroom is the height of luxury. If you're curious about the bathing craze of the 1900s, check out our video on every bathhouse in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and you'll learn the correct way to use a sitz bath. This also feels like a good time to tell you that Glensheen doesn't have regular home plumbing, which you probably guessed by now. Their water is pumped from Lake Superior by a pump house on site into a private water pressure system designed specifically for the mansion. Water pressure was strong and consistent from the basement all the way up to the 3rd floor, which was unheard of in 1908. And heat was maintained by a massive coal-fueled boiler. All of the decorative grating you've seen is disguising radiators connected to this system for those frigid Minnesota winters. There are 4 additional bedrooms on the 2nd floor. A room Chester used when he came home late from St. Paul. A guest room. And 2 more bedrooms for the middle and youngest daughters, Helen and Elisabeth. Here, at the end of the corridor, you'll see a change in the wood paneling that marks the beginning of the servants' wing. Up to 8 staff lived on property, and 30 could be found working the estate on any given day. The rooms are large, and the bathroom is generous when compared with other Gilded Age mansions. And we can interpret that the Congdons were more than fair and kind to their staff. How do you care for a 39-room, 4-floor mansion? Why, with a linen closet the size of a modern bathroom. That's how. A servant's stair, as well as an elevator, connect this wing with the other floors of the home. This stair leads, conveniently, down to the kitchen, which was smaller than I anticipated. Until I discovered the icebox and pantry, as well as the butler's pantry, which is easily larger than the kitchen in my very first apartment. As an amateur collector of china patterns, I found these delightful. Here in the breakfast room, we see more of the arts and crafts style, with oak leaves and acorns worked into the windows. These green tiles are hand-glazed pottery, each one bearing its own unique serial number. Historians estimate their modern value at $150 per tile. When the family lived here, this room would have been filled with plants, easily watered with this built-in fountain. But the most impressive part of this room is the view. Formal dinners were taken in the dining room, where the table can expand to seat up to 20. The wallpaper is embossed and metallic, causing the room to give a subtle glow from the handcrafted chandelier. Nicknamed by those who clean it, the Maid's Nightmare. The Caldwell Company, who made this chandelier for Glensheen, also custom-designed pieces for elite clientele such as the White House, the New York Public Library, and the Waldorf Astoria, to name a few. Moving to the basement, we find the billiards room and the amusement room. I was stunned by the size of this space. Calling it a basement feels like a critical undersell. Here is where the family would gather for games and family time. They displayed collected items from their world travels like seashells and fossils and, I'm sure you spotted it, uranium glass. Made with uranium dioxide, this glass glows under blacklight. It's safe for display, but not for eating and drinking. The table is for billiards, not pool, as you'll note by the lack of pockets, and it's lit by craftsman-style glass shades. The living space continues out into the 12-acre property where these grounds resemble a manicured park more than they do that of a private home. Glensheen's original 22-acre estate was designed by New York landscape architect Charles Welford Levitt, who blended formal English-style gardens with the rugged beauty of Lake Superior's shoreline. Central to the design is the formal garden, anchored by a reflecting pool and fountain carved from a single piece of white marble in 1913. Levitt elevated what was already here, following Chester Congdon's guidelines to preserve as much of the natural habitat as possible. Tree-lined paths lead to hammocks and picnic tables. At every opportunity, the landscape is designed to frame the natural beauty of Lake Superior. Congdon envisioned a self-sustaining estate and had vegetable gardens and orchards installed in addition to keeping livestock. The family loved riding and kept their favorite horses here, and even had favorite cows. The stables and barn continue the Congdons' blend of refined wealth with advanced technology, combining porous cork flooring with a manure chute. This door here that led to a storage area where it could be kept until being spread on the gardens in springtime. I think the University of Minnesota has done a wonderful job here, not just preserving the house, but telling the story of the Congdons as well. I felt like I got to know them journeying through their lives and time here. Clara lived the rest of her life here, passing away at the age of 96. She buried her husband Chester, who only got to live in this beautiful mansion he'd envisioned for 8 brief years. She outlived 3 of her children. Before the last of the Congdon children passed, the family ensured Glensheen would be preserved for future generations by bequeathing it to the university. There is a part of Glensheen's story I've intentionally saved for another video, and that is that this beautiful home is also the scene of one of Minnesota's grisliest and most infamous murders. I'll be covering it in much more detail in my next video as part of a collection of Minnesota's most chilling and haunted tales. But I didn't want to touch on it here because Glensheen is much more than that singular event. In fact, museum staff have been known to avoid answering questions on it because they don't want that to be the final legacy of the estate or the Congdon family. So instead, I want to leave you with a sense of love and joy that pervades this place. Come on up to the North Shore, get your tickets online, and come tour what many have called the Jewel of Duluth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.